Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome back to the Property Investor Podcast. I am your host, Paul Lanfear, and as ever, my inner lawyer quickly needs to say nothing in the podcast is health, legal, financial advice. Do your own due diligence, and ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat. So today's podcast guest is Mr. Paul Million. Paul, welcome to the podcast, mate. Good to see you.
Hello. Hi, Paul. How are you doing? You okay?
I'm very well. So for those listening to the podcast, I will make sure I do a screenshot at the end of the podcast so you can see the fabulous sofa that Paul is sitting on. It's like a Union Jack, like kind of exactly. It's kind of Britpop vibes from the 90s. I love it. Absolutely love it. So it's
Ooh,
traditional to
like that.
kind of introduce podcast guests. So what can I say about Paul? So Paul has been investing in property for about 3 decades. We're talking a really chunky portfolio, no doubt, lots of highs and lows, lots of lessons, no doubt, learnt on the way, an absolute, abundance of tenants. But also, outside of that, he's got a really good property meeting called The Property Thing with his kind of business partner in that context, Anthony Boyce. That is a great, get a plug in for you straight away, Paul. That is a great property meeting. I think there's a very similar vibe to both our property meetings, which is about elevating the people, and we do similar things to make sure everybody kind of puts themselves in the space, but we'll maybe talk about that later on. I'm going to pause the introduction there because there's so much more we can get into, but I'm really grateful for you coming on the podcast. Good to see you.
Thank you, mate. It's my absolute pleasure.
So
You know,
I've wanted to kind of do this podcast for quite a long time, and I'm glad that we finally got it on. There's so much stuff in property we can talk about, and then there's the stuff after property that we can talk about, and I want to get there. But for purely selfish reasons, I would like to start a little bit earlier on. And there's two questions I'd like to get into before we get into the property thing, which is one, you went to like, a pretty just like kind of, very established old school where you were brought up. And I know you've been speaking there, and I know you've been doing mentoring in that respect. Like knowing you now as like a grown man, I'm fascinated what you were like when you were there at school, and also your service in the Royal Navy. Like I've never heard you speak about the Royal Navy thing, so I would like us just to hover over that as well, and just like why did you join the Royal Navy? Thank you for your service. It's a brilliant thing for you to have done, but why did you do it, and what did you do in the Royal Navy? So give us like the school thing. Like what were you like at school?
oh, great. Well, there's a load of points there that are now stacked up like books on a shelf, and I'm going to try
Okay.
and remember them. And memory of such stacked up things was one of the problems in my youth and early school days, actually. So just going back to the intro, thanks so much. That was a fantastic intro, and that's given me some recognition response euphoria, which I'm going to explain in a minute. And also, so that helps with the rejection sensitive dysphoria, which people with ADHD do suffer. Now, I've come straight in there, and it makes me feel a little bit like, vegans and CrossFitters, and people take the piss out of those guys and gals. And I don't mean to be, but I come from a place of not knowing why I was a little bit detrimented, if you like, in the old, what I used to call the intelligence stakes. And I really actually didn't want to lead right in with that one, but you started off with school. I went to a public school, Barnard Castle, which was a fantastic school. Didn't do particularly well, but the reason I went there is my father decided that rather unselfishly to send me there because my school reports in junior school were awful. My sister, we were a normal family, and he had a 20 grand inheritance from his dad, and it was like 3 grand a year at the time, which was a lot of money in the 80s. And my sisters did quite well at junior school, and I did terribly. My little sister's, she's an absolute bundle of energy. I mean, when we presented it, I'm embarrassed to say I've not been to one of your breakfasts yet, mate, and I'm dying to come to one of your retreat days or something like that. I'll be fitting in there like a piece of a jigsaw. It just looks absolutely brilliant, by the way. And Yeah, so my little sister's a children's book artist, and she's absolutely on fire energy, like crazy. I mean, but when we get up and chat at our events and that, you're filled with this kind of euphoric feeling because you're getting to help people, and it's kind of a validation thing, if you like. So having left Abbey Junior School in Darlington as my school report's terrible, and my dad thinking that boy's as strong as an ox, and just about as smart. Uh, so he sent me up there, and I got on well with it. It was nice, and actually it reflected later on when I was in Her Majesty's Royal Navy. I used to take positions of responsibility, and because after I left school, I thought I'm not going to fail anything ever again. I'm sick of being the below average kid. I used to see, you know, kids in my class that weren't particularly bright as well, but their mums and dads were driving up the driving Bentleys and Jags and big posh stuff like that. And I thought, well, actually, it's not just about being a solicitor or an accountant or a high flight and going to university and all of that kind of stuff. It was about there was something out there for me, like entrepreneurialism, like a bit of graft. And I was always interested in what people's mums and dads did for a living and stuff like that. Not particularly nosy or anything like that. But a friend of mine rang from school. I just connected with them on Facebook, and I said, "Oh, hi, Ollie, how are you doing? Is your dad still a specialist lubrication engineer on site and plant equipment?" And he went, "Oh my God, how did you remember that from 25 years ago?" But another pal, I was like, "Oh, you still, your dad did like rolling aluminium and that. He used to," and I was always interested in what people's mums and dads did for a living and stuff like that. I was interested in the business side of things. And when I went back to the school a while ago and did a chat, there was 490 kids that in three sittings that I did, and bearing in mind that the sons and daughters of the elite, if you like, that sounds really bad, but the sons and daughters of people, I guess, that can afford, what is it now, 15 grand a year to send a kid to a private school, and generally that'll be people who are professionals and in business, because I mean they're going to stick 20% VAT on that, I think, aren't they?
Hmm.
With Labour getting,
Hmm.
so that's a lot of money to come out your tax-paid profit, and if you're paying tax at 40% as well, that's a lot of brass. And some of my pals, the mums and dads had 3 kids at school. I was like, well, what? So I got a
Hmm.
bit like interested in the amounts of money that it takes to do stuff. But when I went back to the school to do a chat after I'd done an industry mentorship day where I had 10 kids around the table, and I said to one of the teachers, look, put any gangsters, thugs, smugglers, neurodivergent kids, fruitcakes, stick them on my table. And he did to an extent. And I loved it. It was brilliant. And when I arrived at the school to do the day, it was like the other mentors were there. Hello, I'm Jeremy from SO Fuels. Hello, I'm Marjorie, the M&A executive from so-and-so Penny Petroleum. And, I was like, oh, I'm a landlord from Darlow who left there as a fruitcake, and I'm coming back as a fruitcake. But, we did really well. Had I not let the kids take it right up to the wire with their presentation, they would have come, I think, at least second or third. We came fourth out of 10 tables, and I was really pleased with that. And that was just about connecting and delegating. And I thought for the first time in my life, oh wow, this is what it feels like to be a proper CEO. All I've got to do is sit here, and they just ran off and did things, and they had such energy, and we did well. I got invited back to the school, did the what's called the Headspace lecture,
Hmm.
and the last, the upper six, lower six, and the year before that, and whatever that is in new money, were there. There was 250 of them, and I said, yeah, so hey, I gave them the old, right ladder against the right wall type of thing, and showed them a load of slides from my career, and I said, how many of you guys want to be in business? Entrepreneurial. I thought I'd asked the question
Hmm.
wrongly or something. I had to ask it again because literally only 3% of the hands went up. And I was like, wow. So, I was a bit, probably not that many kids thinking about coming through the education system, thinking, well, stuff this for a game of soldiers. I'm going to be an entrepreneur anyway.
Hmm.
And I invited them all down to the property thing. And, I actually got some really kind calls on a night coming through for parents that actually had kids at the school. I didn't know they had kids at the school. And they were like, oh, it must have been you up there today. Some hairy dude in a bright green Porsche, and now they want to be property developers. I'm like, it's all right. I'll have to sell that bright green Porsche nowadays, but tell them not to bother. So I have a little old classic car which I sort of bimble around into things like that, and you know, it was I loved the day, and I loved that sort of that giving back thing, and 13 of the kids actually came down to the property thing. They sorted themselves out a minibus, and I thought, well, that shows going the extra mile, and now they actually have an entrepreneurial society at the school, which is brilliant. They've just set that up, and I'm sort of helping them out with that. I'm going to go up there soon and have a full day with them. I think I recommended you to do a chat at some old boys thing, didn't I?
Yeah, definitely. And I've done
Yeah,
it at my university, and like, yeah, definitely an eye-opening experience, and like very kind of like what you alluded to earlier on, like a real privilege also to be invited back, you
absolutely.
know.
And people should do that. And, it's not
Yeah.
enough people do. Hey, if everyone, we've all got life lessons at our age. If everyone went back to do, well, not everyone could go back and do a Chatterjee on 365 days a year, but like I really do empower people to go to firstly the old boys meetings, school reunions, and get up there and tell people about your business. And there's such a lot of, and this is what I went up there to talk about. I went up there to talk about the way that I felt at school. And funnily enough, when another time when you gave me a real good shout out, and I'm really sort of privileged to have that off you, when we were down at that social media doing Birmingham a few months
Mm.
ago, and you very kindly mentioned me at the end of your chat. And but when I was down there, I sat next to Gemma, my properties manager, and this other lass that was, we're having a right good chat. As we went through, I was writing the things down on my pad, and I was like, oh shit, what was number 5? And he changed slides,
Hmm.
and I was like copying off the next to me, and they were like, oh, 6. And I was like, what was that? Right, okay, all right, we're on the next slide. And then he's on number 3, going down the next slide. And I'm like, oh, what was 1 and 2? As in, I didn't know. So what it was is my brain is super kind of hyper focused when it's interested in stuff. And
Hmm.
I've kind of since found out last year, I'm undiagnosed, by the way, but when you do the tests and you've got 17 of the 19 traits, and
Hmm.
your brain's on overdrive at 1 o'clock in the morning till
Hmm.
3, and then you're back to sleep for an hour, and then you're back up for an hour, and then you're back to sleep for an hour. And nothing really has kind of helped that, but I quite enjoy it.
Hmm.
I know I'm tangenting off here, mate, but which is generally, it was always going to happen. But I wake up on the morning, like for the first 2 minutes, it's a real, like a battleship on my chest I think it's cortisol is the hormone that wakes you up, and that's a stress hormone.
Hmm.
And I just think, oh my God, you're sort of catastrophizing. And if I can keep catastrophizing for 2 minutes of my day, I'm all right with that. Every morning I wake up and it's like, right, I need to do this today. I need to do that. Oh my God, did he really do that yesterday? Oh God, I've got that to sort out today. Da, 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 da. But then I start to list all of that out in my Apple Notes. There's a great book called Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte.
Hmm.
And when I do my chats, by the way, I have book recommends like you can't believe. I have got a full slide of about 25 books that I need to add another 10 to. So many of those books mean
Hmm.
so much. Um, so yeah, everything goes into my Apple Notes, and then that ends up going down into my spreadsheet, and then that goes
Hmm.
into from there. That's supposed to go into a system called ClickUp to then delegate to people and stuff like that. But I'm actually delegating at the moment from Apple Notes because
Hmm.
I've got a company, Resilient Business Systems, coming into finally systemizes. I feel like I've been 3/4 of the way across the channel covered in goose fat for about uh, 4 years now regarding systemizing. And am I actually going to get there? So I've been trading water for a while, but now I've got a company that I think is going to drag us to the shore like a
Like just
harpooned whale.
objectively with a portfolio like yours, and we'll talk about growing it in a minute. Systemization is like the difference between being eaten alive and literally like served up as dinner, or actually being able to achieve all the objectives that we wanted to. Just circling back, I want to get onto the Navy thing in a second, but I think, and I'll put the link to that book in the show notes, because it's obviously had a profound impact on you, and it's. Uh, I think it's really important just to like revisit what you said there about waking up, and whether it's ADHD or anything else, who knows, but like waking up and having like this, we use the word catastrophize, but you're having like this cascade of ideas and things that are like bubbling up in the mind. So look, I have exactly the same thing, and it's interesting, and we haven't, I don't think, ever discussed this. we do the same process, but just differently. So you put it into Apple Notes and I put it
Mm.
into a page of a journal. And I literally will just write everything that's going on, sometimes in pictures as well. So I'm very like visual. And I really think it comes from that Jim Rohn thing. Jim Rohn used to talk about the fact that our minds are these incredible supercomputers, and they really are. Like they put like spaceships into the sky. Like it's remarkable what the human brain can do. But what they should never be used for is a filing cabinet. They should never be
Mhm.
used just to remember all the nonsense that we have to remember in our daily lives. And obviously, scheduling can help with that. So I think just as a takeaway, just to like allow people to take that as a takeaway, I'll put in the reference to the book in the show notes, but also like do try what Paul is advocating, which is do the like morning download of everything that's on your mind. If do it for a week. If you don't think it's making any impact, you never have to do it again. But
Oh,
for me, like
absolutely, man.
it's completely transformational.
Oh,
And I think also,
sorry, mate.
well, Tim Ferriss talks about the the people fall into two camps typically, unless they've reached some sort of Eckhart Tolle enlightenment. Um, they're either kind of stuck a little bit stuck in the past, and then more, they're slightly more on the kind of depressed side of things. So I don't use that in any kind of clinical way, but they're slightly more on that kind of reflective, that kind of side of thing. And then you've got the other camp of people, according to Tim Ferriss, tend to be more future focused, and they tend to be higher in anxiety. And I would say I'm probably in the latter of those two camps. Do you know which camp you would put yourself in?
It's as you're the great thing about my brain is that I've become a really good problem solver.
Hmm.
That sometimes, so as you're talking there, every sentence there's three different thoughts popping into my mind, and
Hmm.
it's three different experiences that I want to talk to you about. But then by the time we get to a couple of paragraphs down, I'm like, oh my God, and we could speak all day on this subject. It's so interesting. I mean, look, just talking about books. I mean, just going back to that the school thing. So I left school and I came across a book called The Midas Method.
Hmm.
And it was a very simple book. So I used to be a little bit of a wheeler dealer, and you hear it a lot, don't you? The entrepreneurs and stuff like that. I've never actually considered myself to be an entrepreneur, and I've allowed myself to call myself a bit of an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial thinker from about last year. And I think that might stem from seeing people with three buy-to-lets on Facebook, property entrepreneur, I'll give you 10% returns on your money kind of thing. So, like, I think an entrepreneur is a groundbreaking person who does stuff differently, and I've not particularly done stuff differently in my in my journey. I think I've done it quite congruently, like a lot of sort of property traders and mentors out there. They do talk about the shit shows, and that's absolutely great. I don't feel as if my journey has been much of a shit show until about now. No, and we're going to talk about where's your pivot point, and my pivot point is actually now, which is really interesting. I've
Hmm.
read about psychology for quite a lot of years. I'm massively into my audiobooks. And going back to school, so the Midas Method is a book that I came across. When I talk about a bit of wheeling and dealing at school, me and my pal used to live in a pub. He used to get 20, procure 20 silk cut every day, and we used to smoke a few and sell a few. And see, we were the townies. That was the nice thing about being a townie and getting the bus up to school every day, is that I had one foot in the townie camp with my townie mates, and then I had one foot in the kind of posh camp with my posh mates, but also a lot of farmers and people like that. But I was by the time I was 16, and my friend and I had a car balloting round. And because we used to have, when you go and sit with your mate's mum and dad at 16-year-old say, we'd like to ballot your cars. Here's our price. There's our price list. You've sold it,
Hmm.
because people like us and when you see a kid showing that kind of guile and that kind of, not guile, but, showing that passion for
Hmm.
entrepreneurialism, it's so easy to respond to. A friend of mine rang me a few days ago. Oh, a kid had been in university. He'd submitted the wrong paper, and he's going to get a zero in that. He's got to resit this, that, and the other. And I said, oh, look, send him up. I'll have an hour with him on Sunday. And she's like, but Paul, you're a busy guy. I know how busy you are. And I'm like, if we can't put one of our 20,000 minutes or 60 of our 20,000 minutes a week into the younger generation every week,
Mm-hmm.
then it's a bit of a sad day. So yeah, I had a car valeting around, but then I had I was buying, and by the time I got my driving license, I was buying cars in and out of auction. I read a book called Four Wheels to a Fortune, and it was a great book by a guy called Stuart Goldsmith. But the next one that came through the direct marketing thing was one called The Midas Method.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really simple book. It's kind of like the only book you need. If you're only going to ever do one book, these people like, I don't do nonfiction. I can't, I don't read. It's not actually available I think it's available on Kindle, but not in audiobooks, which is a shame.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I read that book and I was like, wow. Now that gave me some validation for it. Used to frustrate me how my pals could read a book and pass an exam the next day really easily, whereas I'd have to put a lot of work in it. Always late with things. I was always, my homework was difficult to get really complete, difficult to concentrate on. It's just my mind pinging all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And but this book was like, yeah, but that was more about why we do the silly things that we do. And my message, by the way, to everyone is, if this fruitcake can do it, any fruitcake can do it. But
Mm-hmm.
don't do it the way this fruitcake's done it in some regards.
Yeah.
Don't do 35 single lets in a row.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, on the tools for however many years, and then decide to build some industrial units, and then decide to get up into some bigger stuff. It was nice to go back into my existing portfolio and drag kind of 20 HMOs out of there, making them from 3 and 4 and 5 bedders into sort of 4, 5 and 6 bedders, and I've
Yeah.
done a couple of 8 bedders lately. But I had an uncle who had left the UK to go and work in South Africa. And for all he was in a job, he was quite an entrepreneurial dude. So he worked for a supermarket, and he was using the supermarket's money with permission to buy office, I guess title splits. Buying tenement blocks and splitting them down, and
Mm-hmm.
giving everyone, then giving all of the renters a mortgage, getting the commission on that, selling the whole block off one by one, and making a good old uplift on that, and then paying back the because supermarkets are flush with cash, hence they've all got banks and stuff. And I used to go sailing with him. He'd retired when he was 38 and sailed to Mallorca. And I used to go sailing with him every now and again. And I used to be real interested in, like, wow, it was kind of like, kid from Darlow sailing on this boat, and like all the flash stuff that was floating around beside us. And I used to have questions about it all. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, there's something different about you. I don't feel that I've really put my business brain to use yet. That's why I wasn't comfortable with calling myself an entrepreneur, because all I did was buy a shed load of buy-to-lets, build some industrial units, convert a load more of mine into HMOs, and then kind of do a load of supported tenancies and stuff like that. So since 2009, when I built those units, right in the middle, we just got started. I felt like a property developer finally, a proper property developer finally, seeing my portal frames go up in this field, thinking, this wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for my crazy brain. So I'm cool with that. But then the world collapsed financially. I thought, am I going to be able to term out of this? The bank were contracted to give me the development finance, but not term out. But they did term out with me, which was nice. I mean, what else were they going to do, right? And it was at a time when I actually had some other industrial units. So, sorry, I'm jumping about a bit here, but when I did leave the Navy in '97 after doing 7 years, so I did 3.5 years at Marine Engineering College, which, coming from that academic environment, it wasn't probably the best thing, but I didn't want to wear a hanky and flares.
Mm-hmm.
So I joined as an artificer, which is a technician, which is like, straight into non-commissioned officer ranks at a very early stage. So by the time I was 23, 24, I was equivalent of a sergeant in the army, which is like a petty officer, and I'd passed my chiefs, and I'd really passed everything. But I decided when I joined the Navy, you're a man now at 19-year-old son, and you're not going to fail anything ever again the rest of your life. And I'm going to make sure of that. And this book, The Midas Method, helped me through that. And I call them my freezer bag goals. Oh my God, they go with me. Yes, they go with me everywhere.
So,
And
for the benefit of those just listening to the podcast and not on YouTube, Paul has revealed a freezer bag with with a piece of paper in it. So,
some, those lined cards you get.
yeah.
That's what
Okay,
they are.
so let's pause there for breath and just let me kind
Yeah.
of frame where we are. So, So it's interesting you don't identify as an entrepreneur, because obviously as somebody who's known you for a few years and and looking from the outside in, what you do is very entrepreneurial. So it's interesting that you don't self-identify as necessarily as an entrepreneur. But do you know what? I find that's fairly common with people. Um, Interestingly, like quite common in people who rate highly in the attribute of conscientiousness, because um like, so that there is a version of entrepreneurship which is, somebody who just, dashes from kind of failure to failure, leaving like an absolute dog dinner behind them, and lots of disappointed in people, lots of disappointed investors, and a lot of like fires that have yet to be put out. But that is only like that is only one part of the landscape. There's lots of other people, and we know them, who are just doing like breathtaking things. They're like using their creativities, they're using their geniuses, and all the rest of it. So it's interesting you don't identify as with entrepreneurship until this point. I felt there was like almost like a pause there. In terms of the Navy, I want to go onto those cards you just showed us in a minute, but just in terms of the Navy, can you? So and I just want to hover over this, I suppose, for a second, is obviously in the Navy, there's a lot of discipline, there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of rules. How did you adapt to that environment?
I loved it.
Cool.
Yeah, so there's my like my goal cards, if you like. So
Okay.
there's six, and that's for fresh ones in the future. And sorry, what was the question?
So
Tangent,
you
rabbit.
so you enjoyed the rules-based environment of the Navy then?
Yes, I
And
loved it.
then I suppose, just purely for my own nosiness and interest, because I've always wanted to ask you, like, what did you actually do in the Navy?
So I was a marine engineering technician.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, so I joined up. You could have been an air technician, air engineering technician, weapons engineering technician, and marine engineering technician. And I chose marine engineering. It was more sort of the kind of the spanner wielding, clunky clanky, and having done cars from auction and having driven a Beetle
Hmm.
in my early days, which even back then was quite old, that fell to pieces quite a lot, and I had to fix it quite a lot.
Hmm.
Which is great, actually. It wasn't in my Beetle, but it was in a Fiesta one time that I had, and I was taking a girl out for a date, and
Hmm.
one of the hoses blew on my Fiesta, and it was
Hmm.
like, if I don't get this fixed, I ain't taking this chick out. Uh, so I pulled up by my house, ran in, got a couple of spanners, and fettled it, and
Yeah.
I got back in, and she was like, "That was so sexy."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, stick with me, love. You ain't even seen the house inside of it yet, baby. Um, so, yeah, I think I love the discipline side of it, mate. I think I was used to that. My teachers, funnily enough, I went back to my school not so long ago
Mhm.
for an old boys thing, and I was speaking to one of my teachers. He was a particularly good teacher. You know, one of them teachers that really stands out. I mean, I used to walk
Mhm.
into biology. John Oates, he was called. He used to sing, "My boy nearly pops do 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 do." Like we just there's those. There was a lot of very stiff teachers, but all of them had nicknames and like really funny ones and that. And my son went to the school. He left about 7, 8 years ago, and I was on the ski lift with them one time. I was like, all the teachers still have nicknames. We had like,
Mhm.
well, I won't say them anyway because some of them are still alive. And I went back to the school. Actually, when I went back to the school to show the boy around, my teacher
Mhm.
that I hadn't seen for 30 years looked over at the now, yeah, he looked over and he said, "Million." He recognized me from 30 years ago. And that was funny. And he was another great teacher. But one of my teachers, I went up there and he said, "You know what?" He said, "You're never going to take the world academically, Paul, but, we've had a really good laugh, didn't we?" And
Mhm.
that meant such a lot to me. All of those years later, he remembered me as a student. So although I didn't, um, although I didn't sort of do particularly well, I got cracked on. And it was like in the Navy, I had to put a lot of work in. But the discipline side of it to me was easy after I'd been in that environment where we used to call our teachers masters, and you
Mhm.
used to have to get there for a certain time. If you weren't at the bus at a certain time on the morning, you were knackered. And,
Mhm.
you were not disciplined for that. But, I used to, instead of doing sports day, I used to nick off and do a bit of fishing down at the river. I mean, fishing
Mhm.
was a sport, right? And
Mhm.
and do naughty things like leaving a trout in my housemaster's ashtray in his drawer for when he came back off the end of leave 6 weeks later. And, that kind of thing. I was that little bugger at school, but with character, with a smile on my face. I got caught smoking off the headmaster and, he said, report to your housemaster. And I didn't bother. I was that
Yeah.
little bugger that actually, if he does report me to the housemaster, fair enough. I'll just say I forgot. I was always on report. I was always that guy. But my friend Charlie Chang, in my class, and that was his actual name. Sorry, Charlie Chang. Um, when they came over from Hong Kong, they gave him an English name, of course. So I had Kenny Wong and Charlie Chang in my classes were great lads, and he used to be able to forge all the teachers' signatures to perfection. I'm sure he would have gone on to be some sort. Paul's great today, signature. So lots of that sort of stuff going on. I was kind of a little bit of towny, bit of rough and ready. But one
Yeah.
thing I always did, I always used to stick up for the kids that were getting bullied. And sometimes I used to, have a bit, bully the bullies, or I used to negotiate with the bullies were bigger than me. I used to negotiate with those bullies, and that's always one thing I always did is sort of stick up for the even thicker kids.
Well,
So
you could say that you may be sticking up for the littler kids in a way, which kind of like transfers a little bit into what you do at the at TPT at the property thing. Is that
yeah,
your kind of mission that comes across when you're standing in the front of a room is that you want to elevate everybody, and that you want to see everybody kind of do well, which is how I feel about it, and it's like the ethos of my breakfast as well. It's like we want to bring everybody with us.
mm.
So I just drilling back into the Navy. So were you at sea? Were you on land? Was it a mixture of both?
Yeah. I mean, well, we started off at HMS Raleigh and we did 16 weeks, and it was touted that, well, with a technician, it cost as much to train us as a fighter pilot because there was a lot of it, big time engineering involved, and lots of 3.5 years in college. And
Yeah.
when we joined in the May, we were supposed to go to the West Indies on our sea training 2 years later. So I shouldn't have really joined as a technician because it was heavy on the academics, but I was a fitter and turner, so like a lathe guy as well. So we did 1,000 odd hours in the workshops, and I wish I'd actually joined as a tin basher, which is like a metal worker, because now I could have used those skills more in my housing sort of side of things, making crazy furniture and what have you. But going back to the discipline thing, I love the discipline thing. I was the guy that was kind of got really fit, and for joining up, I was prepared
Yeah.
because that was my career, right? And I was like just running a half marathon every Sunday. And just got really, really fit. And I was the guy dragging other people around the assault course and stuff like that. And that gave me, with the ADHD thing at school and, being a bit below par, that gave me a validation and leadership. And I ended up sticking my hand up for all of the, who thinks they can be HMS Sultan's leading artificer, who thinks they can lead the division, who wants to go in for this, who wants to go up when we got to sea, who wants to go to Mount Kenya, who wants to go to the pyramids, hand in the air for the whole lot, who wants to do a chat for headmasters and like liaison type meetings coming on as we went alongside, who wants to do a chat for a load of school teachers and headmasters and stuff. And it was like, yeah, I'll have a go at that. So I just stuck my hand up for everything. And basic training, we were supposed to go to the West Indies when it came to our sea training, but instead of going to St. Lucia, etc., and what's that place in Kitts? We were supposed to have a good old jolly around the West Indies, but Options for Change, which was like defence cuts, was following us through the Navy, and we ended up going around Britain on the oldest ship in the mob. Like, what's all that about? So we ended up in Hull and Liverpool and stuff like that, So it was, for all we had some good runs ashore, it just felt like a letdown, and it felt like we were kind of, I guess there was an element of we felt entitled to that because all of the artificers before us had been to. If you joined in the summer, you went to the West Indies. You joined in the winter, you went to, I don't know, the Arctic Circle. 2 years later, if you joined
Yeah.
in the spring, you went to America, and it was like that just felt really bad. And actually, when I got to petty officer and realised that to do a machinery breakdown drill, like the gas turbine's going up the funnel, and you've got to bring the thing down, bring the one up next to it, and you've got to take a steady, you've got to keep a steady speed or whatever. If you're towing a towed array sonar behind you and stuff like that, and something starts to go down, you've got to bring that machinery down, you're talking millions and millions of pounds worth of equipment. And that stressed me. That gave me some anxiety. Knowing that, what I did. So if I'd have joined as an air engineer, they were kind of the elite of our thing, but they got to sun themselves on the upper deck quite a lot. But if the whirlybird falls out of the sky, you're in trouble. If something knackers, to do with the ship's machinery, you can sit there in the middle of the ogging and fix the thing. So it wasn't quite the impetus on our skills, but the weapons engineers just got to lay in bed all day. And I thought, so I'm glad I never joined as a weapons engineer. No, that's unfair. But they didn't do as much work as the rest of us. We were the guys keeping the ship going, and it was a lot of work, and if something's not fixed and you're going on leave, if you're sailing on the Monday and something breaks down before then, you're not going on leave, mate. And anyway, so having to remember a lot of things in order to do a machinery breakdown drill was pretty stressful, to be honest. And I used to worry about those quite a lot. The theory, I could get by that because I used to use, and I only found this when I left school, but something called mnemonics by Tony Bazan was a good book and that makes you associate things with numbers to think about a list. So you associate it's like how people that do remembering 52 deck of cards remember a 52 deck of cards by associating the sign and the number with a particular picture in their head, and then they create a story along a timeline.
Right.
And your brain can remember that, especially, a creative brain can remember that. So, I've been dealing with this kind of condition that I didn't even know I had since then, and finding kind of ways around it. But what was lovely about getting into property, so when I was in the Navy, weekends when I came home on leave, my mum had said to me, hey, get yourself a property. She was an estate agent. And then by the time I had sort of 4 or 5, she's like, okay, stop now, Paul. You're getting too much debt, etc., etc. So by the time I came to leave, I think I had 4 houses and I bought a 5th with the redundancy because they brought out a phase of redundancies. And for all, my parents and grandparents helped me sort of refurb in the first couple just to get them tickled up. I've got all sorts of stories from that world of refurbs. I think we need to do a bit of a refurb special, and I think we need to do a bit of a people special, and I think we need to do a bit of a creative deal special, and I think we need to do a bit of a whatever special, because I've just got so many intricate stories about how I've got hold of stuff and how the thing is, I like to buy houses, or did back then with structural problems. I need to take the front of your house off, mate. Do you mind if I do that first? Then I'll pay you. Completion with deferred consideration, right? Or right, I'm going to give you that much money now, and then I'll pay you the rest later. Exchange with delayed completion, right? I didn't know the names of these things at the time, but they just came out from I really want your property. You really want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Or maybe they didn't, but And what else have you got? Who else do you know? Like that networking, that drilling down into scenarios and getting on with all the neighbours as well, and leaving my number with all the neighbours to show them that I wanted to be a good landlord. So if you ever get a problem with the tenant, let me know. And also the tenant's got all the neighbours' numbers. So if you ever got a problem with the neighbour, give me a shout. Or, I think I've ticked quite a lot of boxes in the good landlording handbook, but also I was quite, because it's sometimes a bit of a stretch when you've got, I always had 5, 6, 7 properties sat there that I'd kind of committed to buy or had sort of bought, or, I went all around the banks at kind of, what would I be, 25-year-old, saying, hello, I'd like you to lend me £1 million, please. Yeah. And they all told me to get stuffed. But then I arrived at the HSBC, and the banker kind of knew my dad, and we had a sports shop a few doors up back in the day. My dad used to string the guys' tennis rackets, I think, and stuff like that. So there's a bit of a connection. And I'd said, look, I can sit next to all of these dudes, the old fellas with the brown cords on, with the 60 properties. How have they got those 60 properties? You tell me, that's what I want. I'd like to borrow £1 million, please. And based on the equity that I had in sort of 5 properties, I had a cottage in there which I bought off my great auntie for 55 grand in a village outside Darlow, which needed completely grenading. Took me 3 years of nights and weekends, which was actually when the rest of my portfolio matured and came up in value quite nicely. So that gave the banker at the time, the manager, the ability, because they could write £500,000 worth of debt at the time, which was nice. He wrote me that check. Well, he gave me that facility, and then I went back for another £250,000. And then he got replaced, and I went back and said, right, okay, I'm borrowing this money at 3% over base. I think it needs to be 1.5. Buy-to-let mortgages had started to come out at the time, and I was like, hey up, pal, we need a bit of a cheaper rate. And he said, well, to lend at 1.5% over base, you'd have to borrow £3 million. So I was like, well, okay, if you want to slot that into the account, then give me a facility for that anyway. Told me to get stuff. So I just refinanced everything with buy-to-let
Yeah.
mortgages. We're probably up to about 0.2 at this point. And yeah, just ended up growing it from, I think I had 21 at HSBC, and then I refinanced everything, got up to about 40, 42, 45.
Yeah.
And then I built my industrial units. A business partner came on with me, and that Adam Watson. And I put a portfolio together for us for about 22 units as well. But I'd also been discovered by, I'd shown an advocate for a supported tenancy around for a person that we support around one of my properties. Like, hey, this is nice. I was like, oh, this isn't by any means my nicest one. What are you after? And he said, I'll put you in contact with the council, because I think you could get some decent business, because we don't see many landlords refurbing stuff to this kind of standard. So I ended up with a dozen or so supported tenancies out of that, which was nice over my portfolio. But do you know what I wish I'd done, mate? And the reason why I wasn't necessarily the entrepreneur, I was just a blunderbuster. Nights and weekends, couldn't wait for them so I could work on my properties. And then when I went full-time in property, I was like a duck to water with that stuff. I couldn't wait to do that. It was brilliant. And yeah, just kind of cracked on over the years, and built a good little portfolio. And then, yeah, just kept going and going. But do you know, if I could have my time again, Paul, I'd go back to 2009, and I think I'd wrap in then and put everything on a long-term repayment. But of course, the interest rates had come down after 2008 and stayed low. And I wish I'd bought everything in a limited company, of course, as well now.
Yeah.
I'd either put
Look,
everything on a hindsight. Yeah, it's a wonderful
hindsight's like
thing, right?
a wonderful thing. If we knew what the government were going to do at every turn, then we would adjust accordingly. So just like pausing there for breath. So you reached a point with the Navy where you took the opportunity to be made redundant, which seemed to work for you well at the time. Your mum was an estate agent. You were kind of building things in the Navy and allowing leverage and the market to work its magic, which is like, as problematic as property is. I'm not, I'm probably one of the least emphatic people about property in a way, because I just think there's a bigger world as well. But one of the beautiful things of property is leverage and inflation, debasement of currencies, and the fact that these things go up in value. You get all of this equity, you can release that equity, you can move it onto other projects or other things, and you kept in the game long enough to allow that to happen. And bear in mind, like, that's not true of everybody. Like, a lot of people get taken out of the game, often because of too much leverage, but you stayed in the game. And I'd like to get to that question of like how you would do it potentially differently. But before we get to that, I often think when I talk to people about the portfolio, and certainly our portfolio, there are identifiable stages that we went through. So, we were doing this for a period of time, then we were doing this, then we were doing this, and now we do this. Have you got any of those? Can you, in your mind, do you see different chapters, or is it just one long continuous journey?
Yeah, I do see yeah, I do. I guess, yeah, I do. Lots of different chapters, but then it's more sort of Venn diagrams where you've got the two circles overlapping each other with the ellipse in the middle. And sometimes that's the sweet spot, when you actually
Yeah.
start to move from one strategy to another. But then you've also, depending on how, so what
Okay,
I've been over the
let me
years,
put
I've
it
realized.
this way. That this is prompted by a question I was asked at a speaking event not so long ago, and it was a nice, punchy, direct question, which was, "How did you do it?" So, we got to 236 tenants, and I was asked the question, "How did you do it?" And my answer was, we built our own portfolio, and then at a period of time that we came to kind of repurpose them to mostly individual house shares. Then we started taking external investment. Then we started doing partnerships and joint ventures and collaborations. Then we did some more of the creative strategies where we didn't actually own the property, but we did stuff with it. And we didn't always keep it either. We often like capitalized the gain and just moved on. And then we have then we put in a layer of management, and then we put in a layer of like consultancy. So it's like this pyramid that grew chapter by chapter by chapter, making loads of mistakes along the way, getting distracted by things, losing focus. There's so many things I would do differently. Your
Mm,
chapters. So
mm.
you can take this, you can answer this in whichever way you like, but could you either tell us the chapters or answer the question in one kind of long sentence? How did you do it?
Great. Well, chapter one was the stuff that I bought while I was in the Navy. I
Hmm.
guess chapter two, when they gave me £17,000 to leave through redundancy, which I didn't think I was going to get because I'd really stuck in through my basic training and getting up to the petty officer as well. All my exams I'd done really well. I thought, that I didn't think they'd get rid of a junior petty officer. I got it, but I think that was through goal setting, visualization. I absolutely visualized it, like I visualized a lot of stuff and then achieved it and thought, wow, this actually really works. Anyway, tangent. The first chapter was what I bought when I was in the Navy. The second chapter was what I bought after I left the Navy while I was working with my dad in a sports and leisure wear company that I'd taken from really quite small to something that was really quite good. Like almost 950 grand a year turnover from a 30 grand a year turnover standing start, where he just sort of sold a sports shop and did a bit of embroidery, like retained his school customers from home. And he'd said, look, instead of, because I'd got a £5,000 loan off the Royal British Legion for setting up in property management. I don't think it was a very good time in property at the time. That would be 97, 96, 97. And for some reason, I just decided to get into that with him. I think on the premise that I will do as long as you retire quite quickly and let me do my thing. And he kind of didn't. And but I really worked hard and but I didn't want to be Mike Baldwin. But
Hmm.
even though I was, sports and leisure wear, embroidery, screen print, all that kind of stuff, I didn't really want to be doing that. But it gave me that 350 quid a week at the time that allowed me to borrow loads of buy-to-let finance and loads of,
Hmm.
just borrow money basically.
Hmm.
And so the the next chapter would be what I bought while I was with him. And I actually, 02, 03, 04, just when I was getting up to being ready to go full time in property, I bought something like 12 and 14 houses, between about 10 and 12 houses a year for 3 years running.
Hmm.
And a few either side, and that's when
Hmm.
and up to 2008, I'd got to about 45 buy to lets. So there was, yeah, there are. It's definitely a Venn diagram with crossovers. So the time when I went full time in property, that was just buy to let after buy to let after buy to let, and then industrial estate, where I'd got this piece of land for 80 grand and said to the fella, I'd really love to buy your land. I'm happy to pay you 80 grand, but I'd like to pay you that in a year if that's okay. And would you mind putting the land in my name? And we did that on a bit of a handshake, to be fair. Um, and uh, and then I paid him when I'd finished the industrial units. I got the planning uplift on the land that was worth 220, which a wise man, going back, mate, a wise man would have flogged that land and done it again and again and again and been snowboarding in Peru at this point. Yeah, I went to the bank with my 220 grand asset, which was in my name with no encumbrances because the charge was elsewhere. And yeah, just cracked on building them. And I learned a lot through building that. And I wanted to do that year on year. My business partner Adam said, let's do some more of that stuff. But then that's when the world just collapsed, and we decided just to play it safe and keep with the residential stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so the last chapter um, is when so I've got a pal, Matt Scott, that I used to see, and he was a decorator, but also a landlord and a bit of an entrepreneurial lad. Had record shops and stuff when he was younger, and we used to sort of meet in Dulux Decorator Centre and like tell each other our woes on the world of property and what we were up to and successes and stuff like that. And he used to go networking a bit. And about 5 years ago, he'd said to me, "Look, why don't you come up to this networking event?" Which I think was a PPN,
Hmm.
and And I really quite enjoyed it where people were talking about all these different strategies. And I thought, oh, I've done that. And I added a bit. And I said, yeah, but there's also the creative side of that you can do. You know, if you do this and if you get, you know, if you, okay, so you can't do that. But if your mum was to get a Sainsbury's loan and lend it to you for a while and you just happen to pay it back at the end of it, then, you know, what about that? Or what about, you know, an exchange with delayed completion? Or, well, if they don't need the money now, why don't you do a completion with deferred consideration and stick a charge on something else or a second charge or go for an option on that because X, Y, Z. And my pal on the way back was like, yeah, you should run one of those things. Like, I didn't know you knew all that crap. What's all that from? And I was like, well, you know, it's just creative deals, getting your mind around something. And we went to, I met Boise actually at one of those events, and I was really enjoying going to the pins and the PPNs, but then they both shut down. And we sort of decided that we were going to, you know, just run our own event. And we did the property thing, expecting 10 people to turn up. There was another networking event in Darlow at the time, and there was about 10 people went to that. So I said, you know, if we get 10, 12 people, we're doing all right. You know, neck end of 30 people rocked up. How's that bearded git got 60 houses kind of thing? Let's go and find out. And Boise at the time was on a kind of couple of buy-to-lets, I think, a couple of essays, and he was working at Savills, dead interested in jumping full-time into property. So, yeah, we just cracked on. And, you know, people say with the ant and deck, I say more the rant and dick of the property networking world. And we just get up and tell it how it is, you know. And yeah, hey, sometimes, you know, I was accused this week of being a bit, you know, a bit of a, I don't know, what did I say at one event that, you know, got someone going like, it's just, I don't know. You've not got to be a snowflake if you're going to come along, because we tell shit how it is. And, you know, we have a bit of a laugh at people. We rip the piss out of people as we go around the creeping circle of death, you know. Introduce people as so-and-so the Viking because he's got a big old beard, or, you know, take the piss out of people's accents as we're going around. There's a few jokes in the room, or any Southerners, nothing like that. What, mate? What's the crack? Count at me, nicking all their asses.
Paul,
What's the crack, mate?
like, you're now beginning to do your best to put people off coming to the property thing, and I gave it a glowing endorsement at the
Oh,
beginning.
yeah.
And I specifically avoided any reference to the creeping circle of death, which sounds much worse than it is. It's just an opportunity for people to explain what they do. Let's not talk people out of the property thing, okay, Paul?
It's
No,
so powerful, mate.
no,
Hey,
and
you know, we subject you to a 20-second introduction that is where you're from, what
it's all
you're up
good.
to, what strategies you're dealing, and you know, the social synapses, as I call them, that fire because someone top left of the room didn't know that someone bottom of the right of the room was from their
Yeah,
town or doing their strategy, or, you know, looked like an interesting dude.
yeah,
And some people can't manage 10 seconds, other people are wanting to run off down the field for a good old
yeah,
minute.
yeah,
And so we give them the horn.
yeah.
And
It's all good.
yeah, we crack on. And it's getting difficult, the creeping circle, because when you've got 80, 90 people in the room, that's
Yeah,
some old circle of death. But the friendships and the JVs and the good stuff that comes from that, mate, is
yeah.
phenomenal. So since I've started networking, mate, or running the events, because I ran TDN as well on behalf of Whitebox as well when I was on their mastermind. And I was doing an event every 2 weeks, and it was getting a bit much, to be fair. But now
Yeah.
I've just got one a month with the property thing.
Cool.
We're good with that. And it's really powerful, really, really
Yeah.
powerful. And as a result of that, I've ended up getting into some stuff myself where people have approached me wanting to do certain, you know, projects, or like, how about you do this? And, you know, I'll bash the cash in, or like, you do, you know, let's do this and I'll do all the work on it. I was 26 years on the tools. I stepped away from the tools about 5 years ago. And on the tools, I was the best project manager in the world, you know, do this, do that, collect this on your way home, buy that, do whatever. Yeah, do this a certain way, keeping an eye on quality, of course, because I'm a massive perfectionist when it comes to the workmanship. And since being off the tools, I've realized that I ain't no project manager. You know, I ain't no spreadsheets dude. Don't show me Gantt charts. Don't ask me to, you know. So it's I've just interviewed another project manager the other day who I think will come on board and be a good lad. Looks very much like Noel Edmonds. Sounds like a Scouser, even though he's actually lived half his life. Hey, isn't it interesting with accents? This guy's lived in half his life in Birmingham and half his life up north. And it like northerner plus Brum equals
Yeah.
Scouse. I was like, do do a detective in a Scotia name, mate? And he's like, no, I'm actually from Birmingham. I'm like, you are?
It's just where
um,
the confluence
right.
has come together.
Yeah, and I sort of like to, I'm interested in that sense. I like to pinpoint people's
Yeah,
accents from where they're from. Like, are you from between Derby and you know, like,
yeah.
are you bottom left of Birmingham? And funnily, just quickly, I had this guy work for me called Chris, lovely guy, project manager, and I said, you know, you're obviously Welsh, eh? And he's like, when I first met him, he's like, no, he'd lived half. It's brilliant. He'd lived half his life in Newcastle and half his life in Lancaster. And I was
Hmm.
like, so so northwestern plus northeastern equals Welsh. Like, I mean, like I used to say, and he used to sit there and say, Paul, I'd never been to Wales, and I'm like, hold on. So people used to come in and say, where's this guy from? And he'd be like, and they'd be like, oh, he's definitely Welsh. And I'd be like, there you go. So I called him Taffy. Well, what's happening today, Taff? Yeah, I
Well,
think that wore a bit
let me
thin after a while.
round off the property thing for you because I do want to to do the quick fire section of the podcast. So, property thing, like an absolute boatload of buy-to-lets. You've done lots of joint ventures, 150 tenancies, commercial stuff, commercial conversions, house shares, all the rest of it. So if people are intrigued to learn more about that, they should go. I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile in. If people click on the LinkedIn profile, they can follow that. They can come to TPT. Let's do some quick fire stuff now to round off the
Yeah,
podcast.
I'm better on Facebook, by the way. I'm not
Okay,
great. I'm not too good on LinkedIn.
I will
Yeah, we're
put
just rejigging all that at the moment.
I
Yeah,
will put Facebook in instead. So from a quick fire perspective, um, tell us a life lesson. So tell us about an event. It can either be a good or bad event. That's entirely your choice. And the key thing we want to take away is like, what is the lesson you would like to share with everybody listening to this podcast that they can learn from you? So while stories are important, that's not the focus for today. It's like, tell us like in a thumbstep, like in a sentence, what the event was, and then share like that lesson that you would like us all to take away.
life event. Oh, what would have been one event? Thing is, mate, there's been so many pivot points, and I hope I don't disappoint you with my answer because, and as I'm giving it, I think I might think of one life event. But do you know what? I should have thought about that actually before. Because I did
And,
ask you what will you be asking me, and
and it
but
doesn't
I
need
tell
to
you what,
be
this
necessarily a single thing, but it can be like a theme that you've identified in your life, or various pivot points, or
I've
even the existence of pivot points and what they mean to you. It's like whatever you want it to be.
I've got a few themes, mate, and I'm very well known for this quotation that was a bit of a butchery from Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, and that's in every adversity lies the seed of a greater benefit, especially if you're resilient, you know. Um, Pivot points mean so much to me. I've actually started creating it. I've got a couple of Apple notes on pivot points because I do believe that serendipity is manufactured coincidence. And I think that comes from reprogramming your reticular activator. I think your subconscious mind just tries to keep you between two lines because we are cavemen. We're designed for, you know, eating, shagging, and hunting.
Hmm.
And, you know, point me at a caveman that gets sick of that. None.
Hmm.
But we have got so much external stimuli into we've got super intelligent brains, you know, but our last software update was 200,000 years ago. And I heard something the other day, and I mean, you can't put a metric on this, so how can you say a million times? But the subconscious mind is a million times more powerful than the conscious. Like, how that's a lot, but it is. It's like to say the conscious mind is what's above the water in an iceberg, and the subconscious is what's below.
Hmm.
And I feel as if you do visualize stuff, stuff does come true for you. And people don't trust that. And if your subconscious and your worldview is programmed such that have got a certain level of self-worth that puts you in this particular category, then you will stay in that category for the rest of your life. And I tell people in the property thing, and I've got to say, unfortunately, most people have got massive imposter syndrome in posting on Facebook because that's not them. So many people come up to me the country over and say, "I love your Facebook stuff, mate. Keep cracking on. you're proper gobby. I haven't been that active on it lately. I've been absolutely super busy. The last 5 years, what I meant to mention off the last question was, yes, getting into those bigger commercial conversions
Mhm.
and 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 a bungalow build that's had to go back into planning, a commercial conversion, two apart hotels. One of them's been stuck in nutrient neutrality for 2 years. We've had the
Mhm.
clause 24 tax, which is an absolute, it's just so goddamn unfair. And
Mhm.
this is why I'd just like now to, for either Farage to get in and ban clause 24 and make it easier for landlords and actually give us some value. It
Mhm.
makes you feel undervalued when, even as bottom feeders, we swim around, cracking those knackered properties that, who's gonna buy that to live in? Who's gonna buy a knackered terrace house to live in? If you're young and then you need a mortgage, you ain't going to be able to buy that thing without the toilet and the bathroom in and
Mhm.
completely smashed up because it's unmortgageable, right? So we've got a position in society. But going back to it, I say to people in the property thing, by giving people lessons behind you on the ladder and putting yourself out there, don't you worry about how much experience you've got, because whatever experience you've got, it's more than someone else has got. And that
Mhm.
person will be grateful to you. And, there's a brilliant book called, Key Person of Influence by Daniel Priestley, and
Mhm.
also his other books. Yeah, oversubscribed, 24 Assets,
Mhm.
Entrepreneur Revolution. Fantastic author. Love that guy. Brilliant. And it is all about putting yourself out there and having the balls to do it. So I sort of liken this to, when Tom Hanks is on Castaway and he builds
Mhm.
that raft. Have you seen the film?
Mhm.
Um, I kind of call it a ring of fire. People are worried about this ring of fire around them, where they're going to be judged by because being a property person and putting yourself out there as a property person, if you haven't previously, people look at you as being a bit of a dick swinger, or your friends might comment and stuff like that. And there's been times when I've, been on the front of Business IQ magazine once. I completely swindled my way onto there without trying, and people saying, "I've seen your fat face at Teesside Airport. What's all that about?" At the front of a magazine. But all my property friends, like, happy with that. Whereas, like, I did get some kind of crap for that off like back in the day, old school friends. Like, I just thought that was really disingenuous about the way that they actually said it. But there you go. But people will try and drag you back. But are you gonna let your life be run by that? Are you gonna
Mhm.
not post on Facebook because you feel a bit silly?
Mhm.
Like, would you feel a bit silly jumping off a boat if there was a fire on the boat? No, like, it's just take the bloody leap. And when he builds that raft in Castaway, he studies the wind and he studies the waves, and he takes ages and ages and ages building that raft, and he makes the sail out of a
Mhm.
goddamn part of a portaloo. And he knows if he can get past that breakwater, if he can get past that bit that is the cove kind of thing, and he can
Mhm.
get out over that bit with the certain wind behind him,
Mhm.
then you're in open water. Like,
Mhm.
try not to lose your Wilson, but
Mhm.
you're in open water then. Once you get over that posting on Facebook of, like, once you get over that kind of like, this is what I'm doing, and I
Mhm.
say to people, the best way to get over that is, instead of saying, "Hello, look at me, I'm doing a house, aren't I great?" Say, "Hey up, this is a house I'm doing up, and these are the shit shows I've had to overcome, and
Mhm.
this is how, if I was going to do it again, I'd do it that way. And these are the people that I've used. This is what I've learned. This is what I'm cracking on with, and this is what I'd love to do next." And you can do this too, kind of thing. I think if you're that kind of a person, then that's you. If that's your purpose, then that's your permission to proceed.
Mhm.
And ain't nobody gonna, you know, take you away from that particular stride. I had a young lady, Natalie Ellis, a great friend of mine, approached me about the fact she'd seen a post on, believe it or not, a fairly unpopular property traders page, and I very, very rarely posted there. And I did this particular time. And she said, "Hey, will you mentor me?" I said, "Look, I don't do mentorships. I don't charge. What do you need? I can see from your profile you're a snowboarder and you're an artist. Draw
Mhm.
me a picture." Um, and I helped her through a deal, uh, and she made a lot of money on it, actually. Um, and I assisted her because I admired her balls and I admired what she wanted to do. And also, she had guile and gumption. And when I said to her, "Do you know what? If you actually chop those trees down there, you'd be able to probably get another plot on there at least." And
Mhm.
she's like, yeah, but I don't want to chop trees down, Paul, establish trees. And I said, yeah, but, go and plant 1,000 somewhere else.
Mhm.
And we had this little bit of and I think we'd had the conversation a couple of times. And in the end, she turned around and said, but Paul, that would be against my values.
Mhm.
And that just shut me up like Kermit the Frog when his mouth does that, because what else can you say to that? You
Mhm.
can't argue with someone's values. If your values are that, then move the conversation on, because it's not going to happen. I'm not going to bicker with you. That's my values. And I just thought, she's actually taught me a lot about sort of meditation, and 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 instead of meditating on so much the visualization of the outcome,
Mhm.
actually meditate on the feeling of the outcome. People say they can't visualize, I can't see anything, will shut my eyes. That's not what visualization is all about, by the way. Visualization is kind of just the feeling of it. Some people are audible, some people are kind of visionary visualizers, and other people are like feeling.
Mhm.
And I'd be really interested, and I think we should go there together one day, Paul. I think we should go and see Joe Dispenza for
Okay.
a 5-day retreat at Niagara Falls or something like that. Do you fancy
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah,
I'm up for that. Yeah.
life's an exploration, mate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people have got to, if their purpose and their values are that they want to put themselves out there, and they
Mhm.
want to attract a certain, attention to themselves because they want to do a certain kind of business or attract a certain type of investor or whatever, then goddamn put yourselves out,
Mhm.
because those pivot points that happen, I'm like, you know, me and Samara ended up coming to do a chat up at the property thing from Birmingham. Completely random phone call, me to her saying, "Hey, Amina,
Mhm.
I'd really like you to come up to Darlington, because I think my crowd would like you. I
Mhm.
think you'd get some real good attention, and I'd really like to bring what you do to my people, and I'll pay your train fare."
Mhm.
Like, how's she going to say no to that? Um, just shy Ben's get now. I mean, you mentioned Eckhart Tolle. The
Mhm.
power of now. Like,
Mhm.
we need to bring that to people. We need to,
Mhm.
people need to study that stuff. It's so powerful.
Mhm.
That self belief and giving yourself that permission to proceed. Another book, The Purpose Factor by Gabrielle and Brian Bosch. That's a really fantastic book.
Mhm.
If people are lost with the purpose.
So our life lesson is around, well, starting with visualization. I'm an absolutely enormous fan of visualization in whatever way you want to do it. I've been recently doing like like quite a deep dive into my 10-year plan for various different reasons, and I was really, really getting into that. And that visualization, like we just, you know, you can kind of you just create your own future by the power of visualization. But the key thing, two key things to pick up before I ask you the next question is, resilience. I think one of the reasons I began this podcast was kind of, I suppose, a little bit, there was an element of frustration in it, in the social media world that we live in. Often people, like, the methodology seems to present this perfect story, um,
Mm.
of everything being a success since the day that somebody was born. Like, they emerge through the womb and they've had like a million successful projects and all the rest of it. And having made reasonable progress in my life, being friends with lots of people who've made reasonable progress and knowing the realities of it, you know that it's just horseshit. It's like, if the story is perfect, it cannot possibly be true, because the realities are so different. Like, everybody's constantly in these storms, of these peaks and these troughs. So one of the purposes of the podcast was resilience. So one, I'm really grateful for you mentioning it. And the further point you make, I suppose, to just re-underline it, is this necessity to put for people to put themselves out, which you've just really like ably described. I think I would add to that as well, and this is what I talk to people about, is just in your own unique voice. I commented at a social media conference that we both attended at the end of my thing that, if anybody wants to follow anybody interesting, they should follow you, because your posts are really interesting. And like, I don't completely follow them sometimes. I'm like, what is Paul
Mm.
talking about now? But that's maybe my dyslexic brain not like fully getting them. But the reason I said that was because your voice is very, very unique. And what I think doesn't serve people is just being generic, posting the same. things like it's just like a repeat of everything that's ever gone before, and
Yes.
and a seeking to present the perfect image in life, because
Mm,
we all know it's not true, and it's also not, I don't think, interesting. Like, I'm interested in you know I suppose I'm just being self-indulgent. I'm interested in like the interesting, unique, unusual, um, the authentic, the less than perfect versions of the world, because I suspect that's more true. And that is like one of the reasons you're on the podcast, because that is part of your ethos as well, from what I
mm.
went. I'm going to move us
Mate,
on
I've got,
because the time
yeah,
is
well, look,
against us, and
can, can,
I knew we would go over the hour. So anyway, um, let's bring to things to a bit of a conclusion. Direction of travel. Tell us in a few words what happens next for Mr. Paul Million. What's the plan, man? What's going on?
well, I've never been very much of a property seller,
Hmm.
but I am selling off some properties at the moment because I want to start trading properties a bit more. I want to
Hmm.
start just getting planning uplift on pieces of land and selling them on. And I find that refurbs now are just an absolute joke to try and do, from a cost perspective, especially up north where we've got low GDVs. Um, Interest rates have made it more difficult. Clause 24 tax is just completely unfair. And why should we get taxed on turnover? I'm
Hmm.
offended, if I'm honest with you, by that. I just think, why discriminate against people that bought stuff in their own name when, people
Yeah.
have got it in a limited company? The arguments just don't stack up for me. And it's like, hold on, yeah, why is my tax bill double what it used to be almost? And
Hmm.
um, I just think a different way of doing things is concerned. So I've set up a property. My brand now is Verve, VURV. We didn't want to do the Verve or anything like that, so we did VURV. I've got Verve Property Management on the go, uh, and that's Gemma, my business partner in that, is absolutely a real proper grafter. And I sort of met her on one of my property walk around days, from going around my projects. And now I'm
Hmm.
doing something called the Human Revolution, which is a lot more mindset based, which is like 99 quid for the day. Like, come along and talk about this kind of thing all day. It's brilliant. And have a
Hmm.
look around some like mega HMOs and stuff. And commercial conversion projects and what have you. And the other side of it is I can't mention his name yet for a few days because he's on not on gardening leave, he's on his notice. And so I've got a really good sales guy coming on board, and we're going to do Verve sales and Verve sourcing. And I'm just going to create trading companies that, in order to not have to sell off swathes of my portfolio, well, not swathes of, but parts of my portfolio, in order to make sure that I've got a massive cushion or a cushion to sit on. I'm going to create cash flowing businesses, because I don't feel as if I've had the capital uplift in my portfolio yet. It was lovely at the end of COVID to stick a few £100,000 on the balance sheet for the
Hmm.
sake of like, oh, that one's definitely worth 15 grand more than that. That one's come up 20 grand. This one's come up, and then you add them all up. I thought I haven't done that for a decade, and then rent's coming up quite nicely as well. It's like I don't want to sell it off. I sat in a meeting with Natural England, gobbing off, saying, hold on, you want me to pay you £90,000 credits for doing a 20-bed apart hotel in Barnard Castle that you've waited 2 years to allow me to even have planning permission? Are you want me to sell off parts of my portfolio and make people homeless so I can pay your goddamn credits? Why don't you just stick a pound on 90,000 people's water bills, please?
Hmm.
There's no common sense in it all, mate. The
Hmm.
LPAs, the way the government are going on, clause 24 tax, like LPAs taking 26 weeks over a goddamn pre-app. Like, what the hell? What the hell's the matter with you? And when you ask them on a Zoom, you guys ever thought of working back till 6?
Hmm.
They're like, hold on, we don't like the tone of your question. I don't like the tone of your work ethic. Yeah. So actually, deliver your own goddamn housing target, mother cluckers, because
Hmm.
it's not going to happen. Like, why would I want to? It's like self-flagellation with some of these organisations and some of this stuff. I've got 9 bungalows sat there having to go back into planning. If we want a tree survey, there's no trees on that. There's no
Hmm.
trees on there. It's a distressed site. It's brownfield, or like, yeah, every single mortal thing is just complications nowadays. And then when you go through all of those complications for very little, income reward off that, because of
Hmm.
the amount of tax you've got to pay, it's like, yeah, change direction, man. But in every adversity lies the seed of a great
Hmm.
benefit, right?
Yeah, definitely.
We crack on. So I'm actually downsizing my own house that I'm living in. I've got a big 5-bed house here that I've got one daughter now living at home. It's like, yeah, let's get a bungalow. let's
Hmm.
let's go cheap. Let's go. Like, this is why I say I wish I'd ended in 2009 and just lived a bit more like a hippie.
Hmm.
And I could have been you. I just want to be you, mate. I just want to go surfing and get salt in my beard. And, I want to go and do ayahuasca in Peru. And, my legs are 53 now. I snowboard at about 50 odd miles an hour a lot of the time, mate. And I just wonder how long these legs are going to take it. I
Yeah,
used to snowboard from my camper van up in the mountains. Best time of my life. Why did I then take on a load more work
yeah,
to have what, an extra, whatever, a few quid at the end of it? Nah, bollocks. Life is not about that, man. And that's what I loved about your chats that I've seen. I loved that you came up with the property thing and professed all of this kind of stuff, man. And it meant a lot. It means a lot to people to do the exercises, like create your best 6 months, create your 10-year plan. What actually do you need to get to that? And
mhm,
and and I've just rejigged my thinking lately, thinking I haven't concentrated on my goals so much lately.
mhm,
I do tapping techniques,
mhm,
and I do my goal visualization meditation, and that's all taking a change. But I'm exploring all the time, belief coding, mind
mhm,
navigation.
mhm,
I want to go traveling around the various parts of the world and see people like Joe Dispenza. And I think
mhm,
it's quite sad, actually, that they feel as if they need to charge 5 grand a time. I respect Joe Dispenza massively, but when you go to some of these Tony Robbins dues and
mhm,
people have sold the furniture to get there, like,
mhm.
that's a bit sad, isn't it? I've,
Yeah.
I've, I've got three concepts: human revolution, property revolution, business revolution. I'm currently working on some various softwares and stuff for portraying stuff in the world of property that I want to portray, and
Mhm,
stuff in the world of business that I want to portray systemization wise. And also, human revolution will be about daily accountability.
mhm.
And I'm excited to be working on those at the moment as well.
Fantastic. Well, do you know
Yeah,
what,
good
mate?
stuff, man.
We're going to leave it there. I'm going to, having listened to you, I'm going to put your Facebook link rather than your LinkedIn post. And I suppose just to finish off, like keep up the good work, my friend. Like the property thing is fantastic. People should check it out. People should follow you on the social media, and you've got interesting things to say that come from the heart, and those are the voices that I feel like we need right now. So keep up the good work, brother.
Thank you, mate. It's an absolute pleasure to be on with you, mate.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd,
Well,
I'd love to say a lot about you actually, but I don't know whether, I know you need to chop me off because we need to get this down to an hour. But, when I first came across you, you were at just a PIN meeting, and I didn't actually get to meet you that day, but the name Paul Landfear was quite synonymous with property in Leeds. And, you should, I'd say, kind of, not like meet your heroes, but meet those people that are enigmatic to you. Just
Mhm.
go up to them and say hello. When you came up to the property tower, I couldn't believe what a smiley, friendly, kind of, and cuddly, and loves a curry, just all that kind of stuff. And I didn't know whether you'd had like a life. I know you'd had a life epiphany,
Mhm.
but I didn't. But I didn't see you as a big square bear or anything like that before. But like never mind what people's profiles are. Everyone's just got two eyes, two ears, two arms, and two legs, and people are like bowled over by the property thing. How like just gobby and normal like me and Boise. We know we're just like someone in the crowd that just dares to get up and gob off a bit.
Mhm.
Everyone should just gob off and be merry, right?
I'm going to have those as the final words of the podcast. Look, thank you very much for coming on, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, mate.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the Property and Investor podcast. Please, if you've enjoyed the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, follow the podcast, like the podcast. It makes a massive difference on all of the platforms, whether that's YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and all the rest of them. If you'd like to join me for breakfast, you're always welcome to join me at the next Property Investor Breakfast, whether over that Zoom or in person. But in the meantime, continue to look after yourselves. Thank you very much for listening, and speak very soon.